Hi, this is Robert Garmong coming to you once again from Dalian, China, where it's come to my attention that my hair is getting a little out of control here, getting that little Art Garfunkel thing going on. Um, Please bear with me on that because there are literally no barbers open. I trimmed the hedges a little bit myself today, but what can you do? But I do want to come back to you because I get asked this question all the time as a philosopher, and specifically a political philosopher and an ethicist, and someone who's published on the concept of liberty, and someone who lives here on the ground in China. Do I support the Chinese government's quarantine and other actions? And in some ways, there's no way really to answer this question definitively at this point. I am not in any way an epidemiologist, and I don't even think the CDC or WHO or any of the organizations is ready to make a definitive determination about this case. However, on balance, may surprise you to hear that I generally lean towards supporting the government's quarantine. Now, in case you don't know, I have been a strong proponent of liberty. I've published on this topic, and I generally lean toward uh, absolute freedom, and I'm skeptical of any restrictions on the freedom of movement, free association, freedom of contract, and the other rights that have been impinged on by this quarantine. Furthermore, I just got finished doing multiple videos in which I argue that this won't be the nightmare scenario, zombie apocalypse that some people have made it out to be. I think the evidence is pretty strong that this is a serious issue, but not the end of the world. However, there are in principle cases of true emergency in which the normal context of human existence just doesn't apply. And by an emergency, I take this to mean a temporary, unchosen, legitimately unexpected, meaning that it's not one where you should have foreseen it. It's legitimately a surprise and a life-threatening condition. The particular nature of a deadly epidemic, especially, is that it is spread by person-to-person contact. And in this particular case, we know now something like 2 point some percent of the people who were tested positive for this disease were asymptomatic carriers. That to me is a game changer because you can't any longer say, well, if you've got it, stay home, because you don't necessarily know that you've got it and are spreading it. And in that kind of life-threatening temporary situation, it can be necessary and proper to restrict normal freedoms. The standard example is if your house is on fire and your neighbor isn't home and you have to pull the hose across their yard and maybe trample their hedge to get it to put out the fire, you'll do it anyway, even though you can't ask for permission. You settle the damages later. And it should be without saying, but I'll say it anyway, that such restrictions should be temporary and limited to the absolute minimum necessary to deal with the emergency. And I do realize that this opens an opportunity for governments to do what governments do, which is expand their power. So to me, that doesn't change the principle. It just means that we have to be diligent in policing the police, so to speak. In the present epidemic, we still don't know exactly how much of a threat it is to world health, but the evidence is emerging to paint a picture of a bad but not world-threatening disease. However, crucially, at the critical time in January when action was imperative, the contours of this epidemic were not yet taking shape. We didn't know what the incident rate would be, what the volatility would be. We didn't know what the case mortality rate would be. So under those circumstances, an abundance of caution was, in my view, appropriate. I personally do not feel aggrieved at the loss of freedom and economic costs that I have borne to date. Now, that may change rapidly. And it's not to say, of course, that everything the government has done has been perfect. I've seen very disturbing video of prison-like conditions that genuinely are bound to harm, not help, the patients/inmates of some of these so-called treatment facilities. And, of course, it bears repeating that the extremes of quarantine and the economic shutdown would not have been necessary if the Wuhan government had responded appropriately in the first place. It's popular in certain quarters to praise the Chinese government for their swift reaction, and even to say, in America, that smugly, say, in America, you could never do such a thing. You couldn't get half the population to go under quarantine. Perhaps that's true, but neither would it be necessary. It's only because of the nature of the system that you have to do it in the first place. So to summarize, taking a step backward, I'd give the overall benefit of the doubt at the current time to the government with respect to the quarantine, while holding a full measure of blame to the government system that led to this catastrophe in the first place. So again, I hope you've enjoyed my comments here, and please do tell me what an idiot I am in the comments, and hit like and subscribe.